Hello YouTube, Goddard Radio Mosky here again with another beer review for you, as is usual. So for this one we're going to come back to Baden-Württemberg and we're going to have a look at one of the beers that I brought back from my recent trip to Freiburg. So for this one we're going to have a little look at Privat Brauerei Waldhaus and a look at the Ohne filter Naturtrüb beer. There apparently is an extra herb variety of this one that comes with the same sort of red label and everything. So that would have been quite an interesting one to review, but I'm sure this one will be quite interesting anyway, and it's a new brewery that I've not looked at before, so hopefully we've got a good beer on our hands. So as is usual with my beer reviews, I'll just take you through a brief history of the brewery and tell you a little bit about where the beer is from. As always, you can find the brewery website in the video description there, so check that out if you are interested. But if you're simply interested in the tasting of this beer, then feel free to go on towards the second half of the video and you will catch that particular segment. So anyway, just to tell you where the brewery's from, it comes from a small town called Weilheim, right in the very south of Baden-Württemberg, right to the south in fact of the town of Freiburg im Breisgau, one of the bigger cities in the region. But the village has a population of just over 3,000, so it's a very, very small community, so a very small brewery that we have here. But to go on to the founding of the brewery, in the year 1833 Altvogt Dietzsche bought the Waldhaus forest house from the Mouthfeel on the road from Waldshut to St. Blaise, and on this estate he actually constructed the Privat Brauerei that would later become Waldhaus Brauerei. But 13 years after founding the brewery, he actually lost the building after it was struck by lightning and the place just burnt to the ground. But that same year they began to reconstruct the brewery at a location just 200 metres south, and this is where the brewery remains to this day. Now in 1894 Johann Schmidt acquired the brewery and the restaurant from Bahnholz, and thus he is regarded as the founder of the brewing traditions of the Schmidt family. Johann Schmidt was actually the one who gave the brewery its first and most important principle, love small but fine, as it translates to in English. So it's quite cool that it has the sort of founding principle of craft beer, if you like. But this has been the brewery's tradition over the 4 generations that have succeeded Johann. But in 1939 Johann Schmidt actually gave control of the brewery to his eldest son Frederick, and at this point the brewery had a capacity of 3,500 hectolitres per year, and 30 years later Frederick's son Helmar in turn took over the brewery, and at this point they had an annual output of 10,000 hectolitres per year. But Helmar is largely credited with putting the brewery on the footing that it has today. But since 1997 Dieter Schmidt, who is the only son of Helmar, has been the managing director of the brewery, and he apparently holds a degree in business administration along with a diploma in master brewing. So they say that he brings both the heart of the brewer and the merchant to the company, and apparently the 5th generation of the Schmidt family are actually already in line to take over the company, but the kids are both just in primary school at the moment, so very, very young. But it's actually quite a cool brewery. If you look on the website that I put in the description there, they've got a brew house where you can go and try some of the beers on tap and things like that, and you can also get a tour of the brewery as well. And I think they have I'm not sure, but I think they had a guest house as well. I need to read that out again, but have a look at the brewery website and you can find out a little bit more about the brewery for yourself. I just wanted to give you a brief history, but to tell you about the other beers that you can get from the Privat Brauerei Waldhaus, you can get the Diplom Pils, the Classic 2.9, which is a low percentage beer, the Doppelbock Frei beer, which is alcohol free beer, Black Forest Pils, the Radler beer, which is obviously a shandy as we call it in English. They have an India Pale Ale IPA, which is quite unusual to find in Germany. They have the Jubiläums Dunkel beer, which is basically a Jubilee beer, if you like, an anniversary beer. They have the Light Line, which is another low percentage beer, the Ohne filter one, which is this guy here, and as I mentioned earlier they have the extra herb variety and the Naturtrüb, which is the one we're reviewing for you today. We have the Red Pale Ale, the Schwarzwald Weizen, and you can get 3 different types of this. You can get the Naturtrüb, the Dunkel and the alcohol frei, and you can also get a beer called Spezial Gold, which is a Helles style beer. So without further ado, let's get on with the tasting of this guy. I'll just bring up the camera and let you have a little closer look at the label of this one here. As you can see, it has the Waldhaus on it, and as I mentioned earlier, I believe this just literally translates to forest house. As I mentioned, it's Ohne filter Naturtrüb, and it's guaranteed with natural hops, as you can just see on this guy here. And as you would probably guess, the symbol of the brewery is just a nice little tree there, with Wald obviously meaning forest, and you can see on the top label there it's got one of these sort of nice kind of Czech style what would you call it, foil tops if you like, and you can see Waldhaus with the 5 stars there. I think that maybe symbolises the 5 generations that of the Schmid family that have been in control of the brewery, or will be in control of the brewery. So let's get this guy open and get on with the tasting. This guy is a 5.6% Zwickel or Kellerbier, so we'll get this open and see how we get on. Let's see if I can pop it open. There we are. I'm not sure if there is a... Nah, this is just a plain gold cap on this one, so there's nothing to see with the bottle cap there. It's just the foil on top of it. But let's get this guy out and see how we get on there. But as you can see, a slightly hazy kind of golden beer, as you would expect from the Kellerbier. Let's just sit this back down. But yeah, as you can see, a nice one finger frothy white head on it there. Actually has quite a sort of yeasty and grassy aroma as you bring it out, but as you can see, if I hold this up to the camera here, it does have a slight haze to it. There's some big bubbles kind of coming up to the top of the beer there. It's not quite fully transparent, but it is slightly cloudy. That's what you would expect from a sort of Keller beer, if you like. It means a cellar beer, unfiltered beer. But yeah, quite an attractive looking beer, just some little bubbles coming up to the top there. It's retaining its head fairly well, but it is going down slightly, but it is a big kind of white frothy head, not a very bumpy one at all. But in terms of the aroma, it's quite faint actually, but the prominent component of it is a sort of grassy and slightly citric character. If you take it in a little bit more, it's got quite a yeasty character, not so much bready, mainly a sort of a yeasty character. It almost has a little bit of that kind of Belgian-y yeast to it, but definitely a yeasty one. It doesn't have any sweet bread or anything to it. At the front, if you sort of sniff it from far away, you pick up the grassy notes, but if you go a little bit further in and breathe it in deeper, you're definitely getting some kind of yeast in there, and maybe just a little bit of cereal in fact as well. And a little bit of herbal character might actually be in there as well, or vegetable character. But yeah, it's a very mild aroma anyway. But let's get on with the taste and see how we get on. That's the most important part of the beer. It's actually fairly sweet at the same time. It's quite a... well, the thing that's hitting me with this guy again is that it's quite a chalky mouthfeel. It reminds me of the sort of Klosterhof Heidelberg beers that I've reviewed for you before, in fact. But yeah, it's got quite a bit of kind of chalky, yeasty character to it. And it's mainly a malty beer. There's a little hint of cereal spice just on the front of the tongue, but very, very faint. But it's mainly, it is a big yeasty beer in fact, and that's what you would expect a little bit from the Keller beers, but you would expect them maybe to be a little bit more bready than this, but definitely a kind of chalky mouthfeel, a chalky yeasty feel to this one. But yeah, there is a little bit of cereal spice, and as I say, you're getting some of the grassy flavours on the finish, some faint citrus as well, but it's more a grassy character in the finish. But the flavour comes and goes quite quickly. And then you have got just a little bit of grassy character and a little bit of yeast, of that chalky yeast kind of staying with you in the aftertaste. But the sort of sharpness of the flavour comes and goes very quickly. But yeah, that yeasty character at the start, as I mentioned, is quite chalky, but it is a little bit sweet at the same time. Maybe it reminds me a little bit of biscuity malt, but it's not that. It's perhaps a little bit of citric character from the kind of grassy hops that come a little bit after. But yeah, there's definitely a little bit of kind of sweet biscuity character in there with the yeasty flavours, and it seems to mix. It seems to stay quite well throughout the beer. So perhaps some biscuity malts and some citrus flavours in with the grassy hops at the end there. And like I say, the kind of chalky yeasty flavour is the thing that's lying on the tongue, and you are getting a little bit of the kind of grassy and citric sweetness there as well, mainly on the front, but the yeast is kind of sitting more towards the middle of the tongue in fact. In terms of the mouthfeel, This is a light to mid-bodied beer, I would say, and it's got the very soft carbonation that you typically associate with German beer, and it's actually very, very smooth, and it lacks a little bit of hoppy bite to it, so it's not the best in terms of balance of flavour, but the kind of chalky yeast, I think, is quite well done. It's better than some of the other beers in this category that I've had before. But yeah, it's got a slightly kind of oily mouthfeel, I would say, and it's actually slightly crisp in the finish. The carbonation kind of gives it a little bit more of a wet mouthfeel at the end, and it does give it a little bit of a refreshing element. So if you're quite into the Kellerbiers, and I usually quite like them, this guy is something a little bit different. It has that nice chalky yeast to it that it's something I'd never encountered until I'd actually come to Germany and tried some of these beers, so it's quite unusual in that sense. Maybe their water down in this region is quite soft water, so maybe that's kind of contributing a little bit to the sort of flavour of the beer. Like the Icelandic beers I've tried before, where they have the water that's quite high in metal salts and things like that, does tend to have this same feel to it. So maybe their water down in Weilheim is actually a little bit like this, but it's an interesting beer to try anyway, so I recommend that you give it a go. And if you quite like Keller beers and you want something that's got a nice kind of yeasty blast to it, this is definitely one to try. So as is usual, if you have tried this beer for yourself, please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on it. Always interesting to hear that, and please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. As I say, if you're into your Keller beers and you want something that's got a nice yeasty blast, maybe something that's a little bit in the cross border between German and Belgian beer, in fact, this is a guy that you might quite like to try. So I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. This is a good brewery. I'm quite impressed with this one, in fact, better than some of the other beers I've tried in this style, so check them out. But thanks again for watching my beer reviews. I hope you've found it informative, and as I say, like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Your support of my channel is much appreciated, and thanks again. Cheers.